So how are we going to deal with this rent stabilization issue? What? Since when is a human right an issue you have to deal with? Whoa, when did you become such a libtard? Human rights are made up by humans, so don't wrap it in some objectivity costume and hide behind it. Makes you look dumb. Okay, well, you and I are actually the same person, so think twice before you insult me, because you are literally looking at a mirror. That is not how you use the word literally. No, there's literally a mirror behind me, and you're facing it. Fine. Whatever. Let's get to the debate. Tell me, why should we as developers build something where the costs are dictated by the free market, but the revenue is regulated by the city? Doesn't that sound like a losing business model to you? You're leading with that? There's so many businesses that operate like that. Cigarettes, healthcare, pharma, telecom, banking. Notice that in each one of these industries, customers will get totally f***ed if they're not protected by regulation. Real estate is no different because if sharks like you get to charge whatever they want, renters get displaced. Here's the thing though. There's been this good cause eviction bill making the rounds, and if it passes in NYC, all units would be effectively rent stabilized with caps on annual increases. Property taxes have been going up an average of 8% annually around the city, but COVID lockdowns made our rents fall off a cliff. Landlords understand that this risk is part of the game, but the good cause eviction bill allows the free market to pull the rug out from underneath landlords in a down market, but then cap the increases after a huge dip. If that kind of policy passes, developers and investors are going to avoid New York City, and that's going to cause a dangerous downward spiral. With fewer investors and developers like us, the building stock will be poorly maintained, fewer companies will move here, and the city just won't be that attractive for future generations. Cities have to compete with each other for employers and residents, and NYC can't tie one hand behind its back and expect to remain competitive. Alright, before you go further down that rabbit hole, that bill hasn't passed yet and it may not. Focus on the present. The reason why bills like this are even being considered is because New York City has a housing problem, and again, developers like us displace long-term residents. Let me give you an example. Imagine you've been living with your spouse and 2 kids in a modest middle-income building for 10 years, not even low income, and your wages and rent have kept up with inflation. But then your neighborhood gets rezoned and speculators bid up buildings all over your block, including your building. A big tech company moves into the neighborhood, followed by Whole Foods, Artisan Coffee, you know the deal. All the shit rich millennials love. And since the free market dictates the rent, all these tech bros are willing to pay 30% more than what you pay. So naturally, your landlord raises your rent too. And even though you have the savings, you can't afford to renew without jeopardizing your retirement plans. Then you realize rents in your neighborhood are actually a lot more than you can afford unless you move 30 minutes further away from your job. So now you lose an hour each day to your commute, which takes away from your personal or family time, and it affects your kids' upbringing. And this is just a middle-income example. Low-income families are hit way harder by gentrification. So why would they choose to live here in the first place? Just like how landlords understand their investments come with risk, renters should understand NYC is one of the most expensive cities in the world. If they can't afford it, they shouldn't move here. Especially with work from home being an option for so many companies now, just move to a cheaper city. Free market apartments are driven by choice. We didn't move here with the expectation that the government would make our rent capped. We hustled to make sure that we could afford it. You get it. We're not broke. We worked for this tiny ass apartment, but you and I both understand we are not entitled to stay here. That is the whole point of a rental agreement. It's not ours and we are gonna move one day. But progressives like you want to allow everyone to have the option to stay till they die if they want. And not only that, the tenants can pass it on to their kids and hang on to it for generations regardless of their income. And that brings me to my next point. Don't with the invisible hand. I may be paraphrasing, but Adam Smith said that. Laissez-faire capitalism makes sure housing is priced where it should be. Developers will get burned if we build too much inventory of any product. And if you offer housing below market, you are ignoring market forces. Dude, Adam Smith has the same problem every economist does. Their theories only work in a vacuum. But in the real world, history has repeatedly shown that when free market capitalists get free rein, monopolies form and inequality widens. In markets where consumers' lives can get destroyed by the pursuit of profits, there has to be some regulation. Let me humor you for a second. If you've got a city designed only for the rich, who's gonna do all the lower cost labor? How will small businesses get by? Who's gonna deliver your packages, your food? Are you willing to pay double or triple the prices for groceries, eating out, or pretty much anything that involves minimum wage labor? How much is a gallon of milk? Don't you try to Logan Roy me. We're the same person. We know how much a gallon of milk costs. Cities need to support economic diversity, and ensuring that a portion of the population has accessible housing is one of the best ways to do that. What good is allowing people to choose to live in the city if 98% of people can't afford that choice? You want to humor me? Well, I got a joke for you. New York City housing policy. This city is the example of what happens in an overregulated market. Rent stabilization programs do a real job of figuring out when people are abusing the system. So even if it does help out lower income families, there's always bad apples that take advantage of the system. Like, there's this study of San Francisco, California, and Cambridge, Massachusetts housing markets, which both pulled back rent control policies in 1994. And it showed 3 things. Tenants that secure rent-controlled apartments are much less likely to move, which may seem like it supports your arguments about preventing displacement, but as their families changed in size, it led to a misallocation of apartment sizes. It actually led to more gentrification because landlords and developers converted rental stock to condos, which is exactly what we're doing right now. Rent stabilization and control has led to decay in the rental housing stock. You and I both get this. If the margins shrink, the building just won't be maintained as well because the cash to do it just isn't there. And while you're sitting there with no comeback, let me put the nail in your coffin. Rent stabilization is the exception and not the rule. Only California, New York, New Jersey, Maryland, Oregon, and DC have some sort of rent control. 37 states actively prohibit it. 8 states allow it, with no cities actually using it. And Tokyo, the surrounding metro area, has 38 million people, a higher density than New York City, but they have 0 rent stabilization. So you don't have to humor me with a hypothetical scenario of a totally free market city. It's actually the norm. Well, New York City is the densest city in America by a long shot, so what works in other US cities doesn't necessarily work here. Even Tokyo, their housing regulations are done at the national level, and if you want to knock down your house and build a condo building, have at it. The difference here in New York is that we have way more diversity and NIMBYISM, and when you mix those two together, you have a whole lot of disagreements. Neighbors, city council members, they all have a say in what we build, and they block a lot of projects. You know, I actually agree with you there. NIMBYism sucks. Honestly, no matter what we build, somebody somewhere gets pissed off about something. Seriously. You know, even though I support rent stabilization, it does make our job super hard. Don't forget, free markets give us the choice to build wherever we want. So, you want to look outside New York? Let's do it! Good debate, by the way. You are a worthy opponent. Touche. Stay curious, noobs.